session. Oh, good. There's Gabriel. Great. Let's see. Right. As I said, my name is Gregg Wilhelm. I'm the director of the MFA program at George Mason University, and it's so good to see so many of you this evening. And thank you so much for your interest in our creative writing program and our creative writing community. Let me start by sharing the screen. We're going to have a really brief slide deck presentation. And so let me do that, and then I'll start introducing my colleagues from Mason who are here with us this evening. And believe me, this will be a short and not a painful slide deck, because I know how goofy they can be sometimes. Well, we'll go through some greetings and introductions, and we'll talk about the program architecture from the academic and creative writing side, and a little bit about what the funding opportunities are at Mason, along with the application process and deadlines. And then we're going to hear from our faculty who are here this evening, as well as some students who are joining us, current students who are joining us as well. So on the call right now, and I'm going to go in the order that I see them, is Professor Scott Berg, who is an alumnus of the program and also publisher of Stillhouse Press, which we will describe a little bit more in a moment. Jay Patel, who is also alumnus of the program, and Jay also serves as the English department's graduate academic coordinator. So if we can convince you to come to a fun program and a great program like Mason, it's Jay, somebody you'll be talking to a lot during your time in the program. There's Professor Tania James, who represents our fiction faculty. Let's see, and I'm scrolling down now, and I hope I don't miss anybody. I think I saw Chelsea LeBron. Chelsea is a second-year fiction student who is being funded as a graduate teaching assistant. Professor Kyoko Mori, who is representing the nonfiction faculty, who, as I saw Professor Sally Keith also joined the call. She represents the poetry faculty. And have any other students joined us who are current to the program? I don't see anybody, but they might be able to join us. I know one student's running late, but they will be able to join us hopefully later in the program. So let's talk a little bit about, we're going to go through about 25 minutes or so of sort of sharing some content with you. And hearing from some of the Mason representatives, and then the faculty, of course, and then leaving plenty of time for your own questions and answers at the end of this, and being respectful of your time. We already appreciate you coming out in your pre-Thanksgiving week schedule, which I'm sure is already getting busy, and we'll try to wrap things up by 8. So academically, what is the creative writing program at Mason? It's a 48 credit program, which is typically done in a full-time residency over the course of 3 academic years. And we have 3 concentrations, or 3 genres that students can concentrate in, and that can be fiction, nonfiction, or poetry. So the credit breakdown is 3 credits for your forms class, which is a basic fundamental foundational class for each of the genres. 6 credits of craft courses, then 9 credits of workshop, which of course workshop is the heart and soul of any creative writing program, 6 credits of literature, and 3 credits of another genre, which I quite like. Is one of the things that attracted me to this program, is a sort of an opportunity for students to study outside of their declared concentrations, to sort of meet more faculty, and learn from these other genres, right? And then 15 credits of electives. And we can explore those a little bit more deeply this evening, and sort of what various trajectories you take through the program might impact how you use those 15 credits. But it's also an opportunity for each individual student to really tailor their Mason creative writing experience to their own aspirations and desires and wants. And then it culminates, of course, with 6 credits of thesis, where you are then assigned a thesis director and working really hard on your prose or poetry thesis to culminate your MFA program at Mason. And along the way, there is a 1 credit required from each student in their concentration of what we call a visiting writers experience. Each semester, we bring 12, actually 6. Each year, we bring 12 visiting writers to campus, or online, as it's been still these days, where these courses are capped at just 10 students. So you have a pretty close in reading and experience with these visiting writers. There'll be 2 poets, 2 fiction writers, 2 nonfiction writers every semester. And then in the evening, the visiting writer delivers a public reading. And then if they're alive with us on campus, it's an opportunity then afterward for the community to go out and have some beverages and appetizers with the visiting writer. So it's a really unique experience. And I always recommend when I'm in my advising capacity that students consider taking 3 such experiences, because it really is a unique part of the program. Now, we started a really robust literary center in the fall of 2020 called Watershed Lit. And it really is something that's been in the works for over 40 years, longer than the program has actually even been around. But along the way, with my predecessor and other students, such as Scott Berg, these other efforts got off the ground. And today, underneath the umbrella of a Watershed Lit Literary Center, we have 5 dynamic literary arts organizations and 2 graduate literary journals. So we have a 25-year-old literary festival, book festival, that is actually expanding from being just in the fall to being year-round. In 2019, we acquired a nonprofit called Poetry Daily, which is a daily online anthology of contemporary poetry. Stillhouse Press, which I mentioned, Scott is the publisher of, is a student-managed operating literary imprint, right, as part of the program. The Northern Virginia Writing Project, it's one of the original sites of the National Writing Project, and also the home base for our Writers in the Schools programs. You might be familiar with those WITS programs. The Schutz Center for International Writers, another really important part of the community that attracted me to this community, is being sort of this opportunity to bring international writers to campus and send our students abroad to do research on their own work. Having that global international perspective is really important. And then, of course, our 2 literary journals, Phoebe, which started in the early 70s, and So to Speak, which started in the 90s. So altogether, these entities are what make these rich opportunities at literary engagement and publishing practice. And we really do see students' engagement with these entities, and they can do that in a number of different ways. We really see these as being transformative experiences, not only for you, the student, but also in the, since they're very public-facing programs, in the way they transform the audiences that we serve and the community that we live in, sort of abroad, thinking larger about Northern Virginia. And with the advent of online programming, such as what Fall for the Book did 2 years ago, literally a national and international audience that these entities reach out and have an impact on. I'm going to turn it over to Jay Patel to talk a little bit about funding opportunities, and all this stuff is going to come together in a logical way to sort of understand what your opportunities are and where your assignments might be. Jay?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'll very quickly go over the basics of the funding. We fund our students mostly through GTAs and GPAs. We have more GTAs than GPAs. The GPAs are actually quite new, only the last few years, but we are rapidly expanding them. And I think, especially the last couple of years, we've really had a lot of students go into those. And so as we expand that in the next few years, hopefully there'll be more opportunities available for that. The graduate teaching, well, I should back up and say both the GTA and GPAs come with a stipend, tuition remission for all your entire program, hopefully, and also comes with healthcare. So that's a big plus. I will say that the healthcare is very bare bones, obviously, but it is free. So It's given through the provost. And if you would like, you can add onto that, you can add coverage onto that. However, that is unfortunately out of pocket if you do that. The graduate teaching assistantships start in your first year in the Writing Center. At the same time, you'll be taking a pedagogical course for composition in your second semester. And then you'll enter the classroom in your second and third years with the opportunity to teach creative writing in your final year. The graduate professional assistantships, they depend a little bit about which entity you'll end up working for. One of the 5 entities with Watershed Lit. But the good news about that is there's no pedagogical coursework that's involved in that. You might end up doing, if you're with Stillhouse, there is a Stillhouse course that is available there. I believe there's also a Poetry Daily course. If you work for Fall for the Book, I don't think that there's a course for that. But not yet, yes. But there are, even if you aren't with one of those entities, you are still able to kind of go back and forth between the different courseworks. And finally, in your third year, whether you are a TA, a GPA, or a student without funding, you have a chance to apply for a third-year fellowship. We take 4 students, 2 in prose and 2 in poetry. It comes with the same package as a GPA or GTA, except you do not have to work. You have the full last of your year to work on your thesis project and to do other work on your writing. Otherwise, the same benefits with the other funding opportunities still apply there. I believe that's the basic outline. Greg, if I'm missing something, otherwise I'm more than happy to answer other questions at the end.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, and just to make it clear, I want to be sort of really transparent with you all. We get a budget from the Commonwealth of Virginia to be able to extend these teaching graduate assistantships to our students. And we get 4 times as much budget for graduate teaching assistants than we do for graduate professional assistants. At this time, we're working hard to increase the number of graduate professional assistants we are able to assign. But we're sort of at the mercy of some budget allocations from the state. And also make it clear that we have been fortunate to fund every student for the past 2 years who wanted funding, right? But we can't quite say that we're a fully funded program because that is not a guarantee. It's just sort of the way the numbers, both with incoming students and with the amount of budget we were allocated, worked out, that any student who wanted a support as a GTA or a GPA, we were able to provide it. So that's something really we want to be proud about, but it's not something that we can guarantee with each incoming cohort. Therefore, it's really important to make that January 15th deadline, because that's when the bulk of the applications come in. And then when we're starting to think about how to allocate those stipends and tuition waivers that Jay talked about, it's going to be the first people, it's like first come, first serve. You're going to get priority consideration when we're thinking about those allocations. So keep that January 15th deadline in mind. Thanks, Jay. Then, so we've got the rigorous and creative academic side of the program. We've got the public-facing literary engagement in publishing practice side of the program. I should also mention that even if you're not a GPA, there still are ways for you to get involved with Watershed Lit entities. You can volunteer, there are coursework, so there are ways to also definitely contribute to that side of the program as well in the community. So it sort of started to make sense that we think about other kind of curriculum and academic opportunities that we could develop and present our students with the combination of the academics that are already in place in this burgeoning center. And that's when we came up with the idea, and Scott Berg came up with the idea of creating an 18-credit professional certificate in publishing practice. And what we try to do and orchestrate for current students and incoming students is that if you want to have the opportunity to graduate Mason with a terminal art degree and a professional certification, we can make that happen within the course architecture, as we go back year to year doing advising with you. So to talk about the certificate in publishing practice, I've invited Scott Berg to say a few words.
Yeah, thanks, Gregg. I want to back up just a minute and make sure that everybody understands when we talk about professional assistantships versus teaching assistantships. Essentially, the traditional model, certainly the one that those of us who came up quite a while back in MFAs, was you kind of got funded by teaching, and it was kind of like if you loved the idea of teaching, hated the idea of teaching, or were somewhere in the middle, well, teaching was the way you got funded no matter what. That's changed quite a bit with our understanding that we don't want to sit pat on that and pretend that teaching is the only avenue for pay for somebody who's got an MFA, outside the possibility, of course, of getting paid for your writing, which quite a few people do, but they don't always get paid for writing in the genre that they actually study in. One of the fun things about Mason is people end up publishing in all kinds of different areas and ways, some within and outside of the genre that they're in. So that is something that people get paid for once they're out of an MFA, but they get paid for teaching, but teaching isn't the only thing they get paid for. And Watershed Lit provides us a really unique opportunity to give people sort of professional preparation. If you work for Poetry Daily, you're operating a daily poetry website, and it's an excellent resume item. If you're working for Stillhouse Press, you're publishing books with an independent small press. If you work with Fall for the Book, you're putting on a massive literary festival, and on and on. And Shoe Center for International Writers, you're genuinely dealing with writers from all over the world, and you are sort of expanding your vision of what the literary community looks like not only beyond Northern Virginia, not only beyond America, but really across oceans and across continents, which is very cool. And so those professional assistantships generally involve working for one of those entities in Watershed Lit, or I should say sometimes working for the umbrella organization, Watershed Lit itself. So as Gregg said, since we have all of this, and since we're offering sort of a robust set of offerings, to say the least, it only made sense to offer a graduate certificate. Jay can help me with this a little bit. This isn't the only graduate certificate available to you. Jay, some people do the grad certificate in education too while they're here, correct?
They do, yes. And there's also, I believe, 3 other certificates within the English department as well.
Right. So there's a variety of grad certificates, and what's nice about these is they provide a credential. For instance, if you want to teach at public high schools in Virginia, you need that education certificate. But it's very, very possible, and plenty of students have done it. I know a couple dozen myself, who have accomplished the graduate certificate in education while they're here in order to be sort of fully credentialed wherever they want to go to teach. Private schools tend not to need the credential. Many public schools, and not just in Virginia, do need that credential to teach. And so I don't want to pretend this is the only certificate. It happens to be the certificate that's the newest and shiniest right now. And we have a lot of interest in this certificate. We already have 14 people sort of signed up for this. It's our first semester of this. We did not anticipate 14 people. We were hoping for 6. We got 14. That's great. So what happens with the certificate in publishing practices, it's generally designed for those people who want to sort of add this professional credential to their experience while they're here. And we've tried to sort of dovetail it as best as possible with the program. Any graduate certificate of the 5, the 2 I mentioned, and the other 3 that you'll learn about if you're here and interested in them, requires a lot of planning on our part and on your part. But you can do it. And there are monies available from Gregg, the provost, if I'm not mistaken. If there's monies available for the provost, but let's say you do your MFA and you decide you want to focus on thesis your 3rd year, and you don't want to be taking that one more class for the certificate, but you're in the area anyway, there's money available at the university to help you finish out the certificate. Is that accurate, Gregg?
Sort of. It's a little bit more complicated than that. But I think what we're saying is, if you're an MFA student, and say if you're a GTA, 2 of your electives need to be taken up by the pedagogy classes that Jay mentioned, a composition pedagogy class and a literature pedagogy class. So that kind of stacks up your electives against those 18 for the certificate that you need. So if you need to take additional courses above and beyond the 48, which aren't covered in your waiver, that's when we can go to the provost's fund to help.
As
cover.
I said, it takes planning, and you don't, it's
Planning.
not something that after your third year, you go, oh, hey, I would like to, but if you build it in, there are opportunities to sort of get considerable sort of support both in the planning stages and sometimes then in the additional funding stages if needed. And so that's 18 credit certificate. Really, it's an 18 credit certificate. It involves 3 required courses, which is half of the certificate. One is 503, our theory and practicing, our bare bone, our not our bare bones, our base level fundamental editing course at the graduate level. And then we have 2 practicums, the Stillhouse Press and Poetry Daily, 1605, 606. The practicums in the sense that you're working on Stillhouse Press work in part while you're taking the Stillhouse Press course, meaning you're learning, it's hands-on. You're learning about publishing, but through watching and helping with books being chosen, books being produced. Poetry Daily is the same way. You're helping to produce a daily web author, a daily poetry site, and it's very, very exciting. And it really teaches you something. All of this work, Watershed Lit, and the certificate really teach you something about the outward facing, as Gregg said, aspect of what happens in an MFA, because an MFA is about, more than anything else, it's about your own craft and your own work, but it's also about forming a literary community. And we feel very, very strongly about that literary communities operate across borders. Literary communities operate across any kind of demographic division you want to name. Literary communities last you the rest of your life. Literary communities feed your soul, right? And so there's a lot more to this than just preparing for a job, although we hope that we've had a good record so far. Meaning that this is all about literary community, right? And the courses, so those are the 3 required courses. Then we have a whole raft of other courses, and we're developing new ones all the time. And Gregg helpfully put a list here. Some of these are very, very, some of these are operating now. Some of them are very, very close to operating. Most everything on this list will be available by spring of what would be your first year in the program. Some might be fall or spring of the next year. But book art and design I'll be real quick here, but book art and design in a collaboration with our amazing people at the School of Art here, like the people with, over in that CVPA, College of Visual and Performing Arts. International publishing, offering you a chance to work on an international journal of fiction, web authoring and design courses, literary festival management course, proposal writing courses, which you'll learn is very, very important in that literary community. Business management courses, royalties, statements, sales, all that, advances, you name it. Media and marketing promotions. And then sort of another bedrock course for developing history and theory of publishing, practicing technology, from a little bit of an exaggeration, from papyrus scrolls to print on demand. And so all of those courses available. Gregg is one of the advisors and is the director of the certificate. I'm the other advisor for the certificate, and we are more than happy, one of the 2 of us, to get on a Zoom with you at any point and talk about how this might fit in. It's something that you don't have to declare until, you don't have to declare like while you apply. We do ask you to declare your interest if and when you become interested. It takes some planning. Okay, this is not that you can't just sort of fall backwards into the certificate or any of the other 4 certificates. But we're very excited about these because we're working hard to explode the notion that you just get out and you just fall into the first whatever job you can find. And it all comes back to that literary community I was talking about, believing that we need to support each other. And that isn't just supporting each other through emotional and aesthetic and support. That's supporting each other in very tangible ways that include our dream, which is gonna happen. Our dream of having sort of a network of Mason alums out there that when people graduate say, yeah, I'm an editor at such and such, so we might be able to bring you on and to assist with this or something. I mean, that's kind of the idea. So that's a big part of, and it's brand new. And like I said, it's shiny and we're excited about it. So if you need to talk, let Gregg know, and one of us will get on the horn with you. I think I covered everything, Gregg. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And I should also mention that Sally Keith, professor of poetry, who's also on this call, is the co-editorial director of Poetry Daily, and also co-teaches in rotation with the other editorial director of the Poetry Daily class. So she can speak to the other required practicum as part of this certificate. And speaking of faculty, we know you have many considerations and options when it comes to MFA programs, but nothing can be more important than the people and writers and artists who you're going to be working with closely for 3 years. And because we have such a rich and diverse and robust faculty, it really benefits the students. We have, obviously, the fiction program is larger than the other two programs, about the same size if you put the fiction, nonfiction and poetry together. So we have 4 fiction faculty, 2 nonfiction faculty, and currently 4 poets on the faculty. Eric Pankey will be retiring in the spring of 2024. So I would like to invite the poets who are, the faculty who are on this call to say a few words about your individual programs and concentrations in random order. I'll start with Tania because I see her first on my screen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tania James, and I am one of 4 fiction faculty, which includes Halan Habila, Alexia Arthur, and Courtney Burkich. I personally write fiction. I teach fiction, and I write novels, short stories. I kind of like flirting with different forms and sometimes genre. And yeah, I guess in fiction, we teach a kind of, well, we tend to have a core set of classes that we teach, which include plot, scene, and character, and those are requirements. And then we also teach workshop. Every semester, we teach a fiction workshop and an advanced fiction workshop. Right now I'm teaching forms of fiction. So if you were to come to Mason, that would be one of the first courses you take, where we're examining different, well, I'm examining different forms like the love story or the mystery form, epistolary form, and just playing around and experimenting with these different sort of rules and constraints. It's been really fun. Some of my favorite courses to teach are craft seminars. So those, and all of us faculty get to choose and cut to shape those seminars around our personal interests. So one of the courses I've taught is haunted fictions. I don't really consider myself I don't really work in the supernatural realm, but I really like reading that kind of stuff. So we read, we've read The Turn of the Screw. We start with The Turn of the Screw, and we start just looking at different ghost stories, different, the uses of ghost stories in different cultural traditions, with an eye toward, sort of why and how they haunt us. And we look at how those stories are leading into or subverting genre expectations. So it's really fun. And these craft courses, well, the way I teach them is that they're partly reading, and then they're partly us, workshopping stories and trying to kind of try new things. And yeah, and then the final thing you do as a 3rd year is that you write a thesis, which is for some people, that's a full book length work, but it's 90 to 120 pages of prose. It could be a novel, it can be a collection of short stories, but you're really working with one professor for the entirety of the year. And it's a really special kind of culmination of your time at Mason, as you really kind of, I think the hardest thing about being a writer is really committing and learning to commit to a single work for an extended period of time. So that is a sort of special experience, and you turn in your thesis in your 3rd year, and then we get to celebrate you. So that's sort of the arc of a student's time in the fiction program.
Thanks for sharing that, Tania. It was really good content. How about Sally Keith? You can talk about the poetry program and maybe a little bit more about Poetry Daily.
Sure. Thank you, Greg. And thank you all for being here. My name is Sally Keith. I teach poetry. My colleagues are Eric Pankey, Peter Streckfuss, and Vivek Narayan, who has a new book after. It's just been published by the New York Review of Books. What to say? I mean, it's similar in a way to the fiction trajectory in that it's a 3-year program, and we end with the thesis and an advanced workshop where we workshop large chunks of material, up to an entire manuscript. We start with a forms class in the first year. And one of the, I think, great assets of our program is actually that we have, unlike the other genres, we have an exam, an MFA exam. And so you spend the second year crafting your own list of poets that you would like to read and study with the help of your advisor. And then there's an MFA exam that you take in the summer. And really, although it may sound occasionally intimidating, really, I think it's such a wonderful experience. And writers, poets improve their writing drastically. And not only that, it's another tool I think that poets have when they go out on the job market in terms of being, kind of having grounded themselves in reading and having come to understand themselves and their own poetry within the context of those writers whom they admire. And so the students actually really enjoy this. And now I'm teaching a class called Poetry Planet, where we sort of talk about making those lists and just talk about reading and writing poetry. I can just throw out the names of a few classes. I mean, Eric Pankey is going to soon teach the modernist long poem. He's also going to teach a craft class on the prose poem. Vivek is going to teach a class on poetry and translation, which he has a lot of expertise in. Peter teaches really wonderful kind of process-oriented generative classes, one called the Poet's Notebook, where students write every day in a notebook and generate an enormous amount of work. I guess, like Tania, I also like teaching these craft-based classes, and I like teaching classes like there's one I've taught called Writing Elsewhere, or The Poetics of Wandering. I think the titles are kind of self-explanatory, but the idea is reading texts that sort of promote that sense of wonder and exploration, which I think is so essential to all writing, and especially the writing of poetry. But I'm sorry, I don't want to go on very long, but I will say that Poetry Daily, Peter Streckfuss and I have been working on Poetry Daily. It is kind of I guess you could say, the counterpart to Stillhouse Press. And it's really wonderful for poetry students. And if you haven't seen Poetry Daily, you can go look at it. It's on poets.com. In essence, it's a website that's been around for a very long time. We inherited it about 5 years ago. The idea is that we republish one poem from a recent book or journal every day. And we have a team of students who work on this with us, and a managing editor who also works on it. And I think that the really exciting thing is the Poetry Daily class, which is also open to all genres, and we really welcome prose writers, is that we sit around a table and talk about poems and talk about which poems we would want to put up on the website and why. And so it's sort of without explanation, it provides this sort of automatic understanding of what it's like to send your work out in the world. And it also, immediately exposes you to like a ton of literary magazines and presses, because we are in close contact with them. And really kind of the goal of Poetry Daily is to represent, as many publishers as we can. So it's really a wonderful, wonderful education. It's something we're excited about, and I think makes our poetry program pretty special. So, I feel like I've been unorganized in what I've said, but I would welcome, any email at any time. If anyone has questions, happy to talk more. So thank you.
That was great, Sally. Thank you so much. And then finally, let's hear from Kyoko Mori, one half of our nonfiction team.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kyoko Mori. This is Miles, the Siamese cat. This is Jackson, the Burmese cat. And my teaching partner, however, is Tim DeNavy. And I think the thing I can say about nonfiction is that creative nonfiction sort of works in the continuum between the extreme of sort of writing about the self and the extreme of writing about something other than the self. And Tim and I tried to cover the continuum. And I, argue that we're the perfect team in that I really sort of cover, or my work has been in the kind of personal narrative sort of extreme. My books are memoirs and, personal essay collections. Although they do say something about like having grown up in Japan or having lived in the Midwest. My next book is going to be about watching birds and living with cats. And there's like a lot of nature and also pet information. Whereas Tim's two books are his first book is called Hyper, a personal history of ADHD, where he combined the memoir of growing up with ADHD and also like the whole history of how that condition was treated in medicine and also education. And his second book was a biography of Hunter S. Thompson, just the first part of his career, written in a kind of narrative kind of way. So we kind of cover me writing about the self, Tim writing about something else, but we really meet in the middle because he's also written a lot of personal essays, about that really address the self. And really that first book of his is really a perfect combination of the self and, other. And our program is kind of based on that. In the forms class that, will be your first class, we ask you to try different kinds of nonfiction that's somewhere in the continuum, whether we approach it in terms of like types of nonfiction, like, profiles as opposed to book reviews, or experimental, as opposed to sort of personal, traditional. You'll cover different types of nonfiction. And the other thing is that my work is totally kind of traditional. And Tim knows so much more about lyric essays, non-traditional forms, hybrid forms. So the classes we offer after you do the forms, and also, of course, the workshops, those are the kind of two sort of poles of your, program. In the middle, we try to offer craft courses that cover this continuum. Tim teaches the lyric essay. The continuum between the personal and, the subject is something he actually teaches, hybrid forms. I tend to teach a tradition of the personal essay. But one of my favorite courses is the one I'm teaching, the craft course. It's called Boundaries, Writing About Your Family and Friends, which is such a fraught topic for anyone writing personal narrative. How do you write about your family in a way that you could still have Thanksgiving with them and not be disinvited? The answer may be that there's really no good strategy except to just write and hope for the best. But we do have people, we have students read essays, not about just essays about people's family, but essays writers have written about writing about family. So we do that. And then, of course, there's the thesis, which is on 80 to 100 pages of, nonfiction. And people have done, everything from really kind of personal narrative about their growing up to like writing about, I think someone's going to write about, this medieval, saint, so that's going to be next year, that's going to be a kind of research oriented thing. But people have written about, say, growing up, in a particular faith tradition, and growing away from it, but not totally abandoning it, which is a really interesting kind of a subject. So that's really pretty much what our program is. And the other thing we pride ourselves on is that, we think of nonfiction because it's kind of smaller, well, I think poetry and nonfiction are about the same size, but we really are into like, going out after readings and hanging out. And Tim is just so good at getting people together. I can't take credit for this because I'm such an introvert. But you can rest assured that if you come and join us, Tim will make sure that we are gonna hang out as a community and also network. We do, invite students to come and participate in events in DC, like the reading series, different like literary scenes, social events, and Tim is very well connected. So he will know what to invite you to do, and very good at organizing that. So we really kind of, pride ourselves on creating a sense of community and showing you the kind of, nonfiction scene in DC as well as in Northern Virginia. And as Sally and Tania both said, I too would be very happy to answer any questions that you have. You can just email me at my George Mason account. So thank you. And Jackson, thanks you too.
Thanks, Kyoko. That was a really good segue for me. I'm going to end my slide deck presentation and let's see, expand this. I think you're still seeing it. Stop sharing. There we go. Then I get to see some of your faces again. And yeah, that was a good segue, Kyoko, because perhaps one of the most impactful aspects of any MFA program is going to rest with your other artists that you meet and the work that you explore together, the craft that you learn and push each other with. And these are also going to be the peers that you meet in your own cohort and across cohorts that are going to be your support and your encouragement and your sounding boards and your sort of artistic companions for long after graduating and moving on from Mason. So I would like just a few of our current student guests to say something about their experiences so far. I see Chelsea and I think Eli, you're both literally at the end of the next week, halfway through your program. So Chelsea, do you want to just say a few words about your time at Mason so far?
Sure. My computer is a little slow, so I hope I don't freeze at any point. I didn't prepare a speech, Gregg, but I can say that I remember when I first got here. I'm a second year student. I'm a second year GTA, and I'm in the fiction program. And I know when I first got here a year ago, I just remember having with Katie, who was one of the other second year fiction students. And we were just talking about, the schools we applied to and some of the things that we wanted. And I remember telling her that I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I felt really good about just where I was at and the people that I was around. And it was such like a nice feeling, like that's how you should feel when you're doing something like a graduate degree, just because it's asks so much of you. But yeah, I love my cohort. They're great. They're fun. We have fun. There's a lot of different things that we do, like or things that I guess can connect you with the program. I think that for one, me and a few other students just recently started back up Kindling, which was a student-run reading series that happens on campus where basically the students get together and host readings just for students. And that's like a really nice space for us to be able to read together and just be intimate and kind of like create a community that's just own outside the classroom. So we very recently started that back up. We just had our first reading, I think like a week ago. And I'm really excited to see what else we can do with that. I'm really excited for that. And then I also know that there's some literary journals that you can work for while you're a student. I'm on the PB staff right now, and it's a really good experience if you want to go into like stuff. You can do like a fiction editor or like a poetry editor position. You can also read for the journals your first year. So if you want to just get a taste of that, you can do readings for the journals and basically help read their submissions and some picks for them. And that's a good way to like, one, do some, I guess, out of class reading and stuff like that. And two, I think I have meetings every semester, so that's a nice way to just sit around a group of people and talk about writing. So that's really cool too. I know there's another one called So to Speak. But yeah, those are some things I'm involved with. I know that I think Gregg might mention the Shoes Fellowship stuff.
Mhm.
And I was also a very recent Shoes Fellow. So if you have questions about stuff like that, I can hopefully answer some of that stuff.
Thanks, Chelsea. I think
I
the
think that's
important
all
stuff
I
came
got, Gregg,
through.
for now. If Eli wants to say some things.
Thanks. And
Eli, that was me turning the mic over to you.
that's fine. I think it came across the important stuff you wanted to mention, but also Eli Vandergrift is in the room, also a second-year student. Do you have a few words you want to share, Eli?
Yeah, I can share a few words. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, I'm a second year in the poetry program. I'm also the assistant editor-in-chief and also kind of / poetry editor of So to Speak, which is one of the literary magazines on campus, which I believe Chelsea mentioned. Chelsea's a part of Phoebe, which is more like general based, whereas So to Speak is based in intersectional feminism. And yeah, what else? I write a lot about like animals and like queer poetry, eco poetry. I'm in Poetry Planet right now with Professor Sally Keith, and I really like it a lot. I get to read like a lot of really cool poets. And yeah, if anyone has any questions about like Mason or the area, I went to Mason for my undergrad as well. And I was a creative writing, well, I was an English major, but I had a concentration in cultural studies as well as creative writing. So if anyone has any questions about like Mason at all, like I've been here since 2017, so like I kind of know a lot of it. I know the area as well. So if you have questions about like, where to go to eat or like, cool places in DC to hang out, always just feel free to email me. I'm definitely one of those people, especially now that I'm teaching. I'm like always on my email, like constantly checking it, which is not healthy, but you kind of have to do that. But yeah, that's kind of all I have. I also don't want to take a whole lot of time. But yeah, I can answer any questions about Mason at all.
Great. Thanks so much. And I have a whole list of students who, if you want to reach out to other current students or reach out to Eli and Chelsea, please reach out to me first and I'll make the connections. But students who are in different years, studying different genres, and have various graduate assistant assignments, both as teachers and professionals. So feel free to reach out to me. And in the time remaining, wow, that was just such good content. Are there questions from the audience and from you all? That's really important too. And you can either unmute yourself or throw a question in the chat.
Yeah, I was wondering for those different certificates, is it possible to get more than one certificate? And does one certificate like put you over the program, like 3-year program, or does it kind of integrate as far as credits go?
Jay?
So I believe you can take 2 certificates along at the same time along with the MFA program. However, each certificate is different in that the publishing certificate, I think Gregg and Scott have worked hard to kind of integrate it with the MFA program. The other ones will definitely go over your allotted amount. That's okay if you're willing to do that. And we definitely encourage you to do that, but you got to be aware that it will be it'll be extra coursework, definitely, to go over that.
Yeah, and Jay, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think like if you took an education certificate over in the education school or department, we wouldn't have access to our provost supplemental funds to help with those courses, would we?
That's correct. No, I mean, I don't believe that we would.
So
well, I'd have to dig into the details more, but I don't really think that would be possible. Yeah.
And that would also take a lot of advising, both with me and whomever is directing the other certificate that's not.
Yeah, exactly. We would have to kind of, there'd be a lot of directing. Yeah, there'd be a lot of directing and kind of figuring it out. And again, I think we are absolutely willing to do that, but it is definitely an individual thing that we'd have to kind of work with you on.
That's a good question about the Shoe Center research. Chelsea, if you can chime in more, but just recently, Chelsea traveled to South America, and we had another student travel to Germany, and another student traveled to the Highlands of Scotland. And, you know, this is, I think there are 3 or 4 Shoes fellows every summer for the past 5 years. It got kind of screwy during COVID when travel was a little bit more difficult. But the case for a strong application would be, you know, how would this travel allow you access to research that is going to inform your writing and very likely inform your thesis, your big culminating project. But they've gone all over. We had a few students who did a domestic travel when we had a nonfiction student who's very interested in writing about border families who traveled along the southern and Mexican border, doing research there during COVID when travel was so tough. So both those fellowships and the 4th year fellowships, as you can imagine, are really competitive, right? Yeah. Let me just read this out, maybe. A question for current students and alumni. What goals did you enter the program with, and how did you accomplish them, and how did they shift or expand over your time in the program?
Yeah, so I can go ahead. I think my goal, I graduated in 2020. So it was right into the pandemic. And so I actually did get an internship with like a publishing house, but because of COVID, it was like remote. And so it wasn't as great as an opportunity as it could have been. And so my initial goal was like, I knew I wanted to write, and I knew I also like needed employment. And so I wanted to, you know, find something that would combine both of those things. An MFA program just seemed like a right fit. I also knew several of the people who I went to undergrad with also went to Mason for an MFA. So at least I knew people in the program. I also know that Mason has really great faculty. That's always like a really strong thing about Mason, is like the people are amazing and really want you to succeed. So I knew that, like, you know, I wanted to write. That was one of my goals. And I also wanted a community that would support me writing, as well as I could, you know, get some kind of funding. I would never go with a program that didn't offer funding, honestly. And so Mason's program is very, you know, considerate with that. My goals as terms of writing, I definitely have written way more than I have ever written like in my life. So it's definitely accomplished that. My computer is also almost dying too. It's so funny that everyone is having computer problems, but yeah, I think that what was the second part of the question? How did they shift and expand? So now I think I'm working on a manuscript right now. And I mean, like the final thesis is kind of like a manuscript length. And I've already gotten, since I'm in a manuscript course right now, in my second year, I've already kind of developed a lot of writing that like I want to continue on into my third year. So that has been great. I think it's definitely not necessarily shifted, but it's definitely expanded like over the course of my time at Mason so far. So that's, you know, that's something. I hope I answered your question.
I'd like to thank you, Eli. I'd like to circle back really quickly about the GTA trajectory, the teaching assistants. Because we have a really robust and popular undergraduate BFA in creative writing program, some of soon-to-be graduates are in this room. There's always an opportunity for those third-year MFA students who want to teach a creative writing course. So not only do you get the pedagogical experience on your transcript, you really get in the classroom experience teaching composition, literature, and creative writing. We like to think that makes our graduate teaching assistants the most competitive they can possibly be in entering the academic job market. Oh, great question about, I'll turn it over to the faculty about the workshop models that might be used.
You know, everybody uses a workshop model that makes sense to them, you know, so we don't really impose like one model, you know, from the kind of traditional model where the writer doesn't really speak while they're being workshopped, to the model where, you know, the writer organizes the questions. I think that's a continuum. And I think we all do what makes sense to us. I tend to do the traditional model, but starting with the writer reading, you know, from their work and asking, you know, just saying something. And then we do discuss the piece of writing by going around the room and talking about what's working really well and what could make it better. And then at the end, we bring in the writer to ask questions. I believe in this because, you know, when I was a younger writer, I felt like the person who was most likely to hurt my writing was myself, with my insecurity and my uncertainty and my fear. And there was really a lot to be learned from just sitting and listening to people talk about my writing, you know, which is what's going to happen when I send it out to somebody I don't know, such as an editor or an agent. So that was helpful to me. And in my experience, students are so positive and constructive that I have never had a, you know, I have not had a workshop where I really felt like I had to intervene because it was negative. In fact, sometimes I have to say, that's great. This is really a strong piece of writing, but really, what could make it even better? So that's what I've done, but I know other people do it differently. And I think, you know, I just believe every instructor should do it in a way where their strength as a leader, you know, can be employed, you know, like used to its, you know, fullest.
Yeah, I would say my way is very similar to Kyoko's. I usually I ask the writer if they want to participate vocally or not, and more often than not, they kind of decide when they want to weigh in and when they don't want to answer a question or whatever. But we talk a lot first about observations. So the writer generally is less vocal in that part because they're trying to kind of collect impressions and what the thing is about and stuff like that. And then we talk a lot about intentions, and then that is when the writer tends to weigh in more. And in clarifying sometimes those intentions and the distance between the intention and the interpretation that other students are having, that can sometimes lead to generating new ideas. But you know, some writers may prefer a less prescriptive kind of workshop, and so they, you know, that's why I asked them if they'd rather be, you know, less vocal and just hear about, you know, in general impressions and specific places of confusion. But I think in both models, I'm sure Kyoko would agree that the main thing is just reading very as closely as we can. And yeah, I think it's probably pretty similar in other classes that I don't know. Yeah.
And as a teacher, I think what happens in the classroom, in the class time, is only like half of my interaction with that manuscript and that student. I mean, anytime I get a manuscript and a workshop, I read it at least twice and really annotate it closely and write this like long letter, about what I think about, its strengths and how it could be what I think it really is trying to be. Because I do really believe, and I think this is also true of my own work, sometimes the writer, themselves don't quite understand what it's about. And, it's kind of more apparent to a careful reader. And I always appreciate it when people told me, this is really, the heart of the story in a way. And it would almost always be about something I was like trying not to get into too much. This happens the most, I would say, in nonfiction, but I've written fiction too, and that has been somewhat true in fiction too. So, for that reason, the careful reading and commenting is really what matters. And half of it happens in the class, half of it happens, I think, when I'm at home, like reading and commenting. And I also ask my other students to comment on each other's work. And, I do take that seriously. So, if you take a workshop that has like, 12 other people, 11 other people, you would be getting, like input from all of them in writing as well as in the classroom.
Sally, anything to add? Mute. Thanks.
I would echo what Kyoko and Tania have said. I personally think because poetry tends to be a shorter form, there's room for a lot of experiment. And one of my sort of ideals is just like shifting things up, and doing things differently, doing short workshops, long workshops, workshops led by the student, workshops not led by the student. And another thing I think is different, since your question asked from the Iowa model, is, I tend to teach my workshops alongside writing and writing models. And so I think that's a little bit different, but I tend to enjoy having conversations about writing while we are in conversation with another piece of writing. So in a sense, I think it's sort of there are many authorities in the classroom, and there's not one authority, and I think that's important. But I generally, I usually say to students, I think, especially in poetry, I think that the space of the workshop has so much to do with learning how to talk about and uplift poems, and that's a very hard thing to do. And frankly, I think one of the reasons I continue teaching is because it's something that continues to be interesting for me, is how to talk about writing. I don't think it's second nature. It's a challenge, and I enjoy that.
And speaking of those conversations, Sally, we have also individually and collectively been reading current texts and thinking about the kinds of matters that these texts bring up. Matthew Salas's book, Felicia Rose Chavez, has actually come and talked to us twice at sessions. And this might, from David Murr, you may be less familiar with this one, Stranger's Journey. So race, identity, and narrative craft in writing. So, these texts are also on our radar, and there are things that we discuss again in our classes and collectively and over coffee and all kinds of things. Good question though about that model. And thank you, Chelsea, for adding a little bit more detail about how you used your Schuss Center fellowship in South America.
Gregg, it seems like someone wants to know if there are application fee waivers. I don't.
Oh yeah, right. Thanks. Yes, there are. There are a limited amount. Thanks, Sally, for reminding me. There are a limited amount of fee waivers for the application fee, which I think is $75. Be in touch with Jay Patel, and we will dole them out until there are no more. I don't know exactly what the status of that situation is right now, but we have gotten, I know, at least a half a dozen requests so far. You're muted, Jay, if you're saying anything.
Oh, I was just nodding in agreement. They're
nodding.
very limited right now, so
Okay.
if you do need one, get in touch with me.
Yep, first come, first served. Thanks. Yeah. That's an important question too. Yep, for sure. Well, it's getting to be 10 after 8. Any last quick questions before we close this portion of our evening together? Again, always reach out to me if you have questions of me. The faculty emails are in the chat. If you want to get in touch with a student, I might be able to help you reach a more appropriate student given what your genre is, and maybe if you're interested in GTA versus a GPA. So reach out to me first and I'll make the connections thereafter. I know some of you, your names are familiar, and I've seen you already have applications started in the Salesforce application system. As with any arts program, most of the weight is dependent on that creative portfolio. So I wish you a lot of luck and good writing over the next several weeks over the holidays and winter breaks as we reach that January 15th deadline. But if you're here tonight, you're probably pretty eager to hit that January 15th deadline, so you have priority consideration of our funding opportunities. Sound good? Well, thanks. And thanks again for your interest in the MFA program at George Mason University. Let's keep the lines of communication open and look forward to talking to you each individually some more. Have a good night.